Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? Let me welcome you all. Hello, everybody. My name is Bill Heffernan. I'm one of the founders of ScreenSafe. This is a Zoom webinar. Only panelists will be shown on the screen. Participants' microphones have all been muted, but I do again want to encourage anyone who has a question or a comment to please put that in the chat so we can circle back to it before we're finished today. If you'd like to write a general message in the group, please feel free to do that. If you have see someone in the chat that you'd like to chat with directly, feel free to do that as well. So I'm excited to welcome you here today to our webinar regarding testing methods and the evolution of marijuana testing. If you have any technical difficulties, please send a message in the chat. We have several people from CAM, Chicago Association Management, here helping us. While this may look smooth to you, we have 3 people in the background making sure, there are 4 people in the background making sure this all goes well. So call or text for tech support. Let me just stop here for a second. So for many of us, we have worked in the drug and alcohol field and the workplace safety field for many years. I know that I began working as an addictions counselor back in 1984 and then went to work for a company called Benzinger DuPont and Associates, where I worked for the former head of the Drug Enforcement Administration and the former director of NIDA and worked with companies around the country and nuclear stations around the country on drug policy. The circumstances around drug testing have changed dramatically over the last 30 years. The use of marijuana, both medically and recreationally, is sweeping across the country. And whatever your feelings about that, the continued expansion of marijuana use is undeniable. This change is and will continue to affect the workplace. According to the Quest Diagnostic Index that Dr. Harwani will be addressing in a little bit, positive rates have increased and post-accident positive drug tests have increased steadily over the last several years. And with regard to workplace safety, that to me is a concerning fact. The burden for frontline supervisors to recognize and act when an employee comes to work impaired has increased substantially. And at the same time, determining when to take action based on different states and what they will and won't allow and how to interpret drug test results is more confusing now than it's ever been. It is my hope that our presentation today by our esteemed and knowledgeable colleagues will help offer some insight and guidance on the evolution of your testing program. So our speakers today, our first speaker today is Dr. Suhash Harwani from Quest Diagnostics. Our second, Dr. Harwani will be addressing urine testing. Our second speaker is Mike Jeffries from Omega Laboratories, who will be talking about saliva or oral fluid testing. Mark Freemall from Omega Laboratories will also then talk about hair testing. And finally, Nina French from Hound Labs will be addressing breath testing for marijuana. So just the background on ScreenSafe. ScreenSafe has been around since 2000 and since 2000. Quite frankly, we were an accidental company. I worked with one of our at the time, I co-owned an employee assistance program company with my partner, Gary Cohen, my business partner, Gary Cohen. And one of our clients was a large labor union and the Contractors Association, and they were working on a drug testing policy. So I worked with them for about 1.5 years, writing their drug testing policy. 23 years ago, people's positions on drug testing were very different. Some of the contractors on one side of the table were saying, hey, if someone tests positive, we want them out. We want to get them out of our industry. And on the other hand, the union was saying, hey, listen, we just spent 5 years training these people to be competent tradespeople, and we can't just kick them out. They'll go across the street and compete against us. So it took 1.5 years to 2 years of negotiating and talking and developing a plan. But once we finished developing that plan, we looked around for someone to help us run their program. And we just couldn't find someone who understood the multi-employer work group, where, at that point in time, there were 14,000 of these tradespeople and 700 different contractors. And it was a real challenge for people to wrap their heads around, how do I run a program for a group that diverse? So ScreenSafe started to serve that one client. And over the years, we've our network of clients that we serve has expanded dramatically. And we now serve many people in the trades in and around Chicago, Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, Iowa, California, Nevada. But we also do a lot of work in healthcare, where we work with hospitals and healthcare institutions to help them when someone comes to work impaired or as they consider their pre-hire testing process. Additionally, we work for a variety of private companies as well. For some of our labor groups, we do participate in the pre-hire process, and we serve as the hub, where there's, before someone comes into an apprenticeship program, they're sent for a urine drug test, a hair drug test, a physical, and an agility or human performance evaluation. And we collect all that information and provide it back to the apprenticeship programs, so that as they bring someone in, they're confident that that person can do the physical activities required by that job. Our approach to our work is really very much focused on workplace safety. We're not interested in catching and punishing people. That's certainly not our responsibility or our interest. Our goal is to identify when someone has a problem, and then based on the employer's policy or the labor group's policy, help figure out a way for that person to get the resources and assistance that he or she needs to address and potentially mitigate their problem or treat their problem situation. I want to thank our 4 panelists from Hound Labs, from Quest Diagnostics, and Omega Labs. We currently partner with Quest and Omega and a couple of other labs to serve our clients across the country, and we're excited for Hound Labs products for breath testing for marijuana when they come out and working with them. So there are many questions about testing. We get them all the time. What method is the best? What is the window of detection? How long, if I do a saliva test, how long will that show? If I do a breath test, if I do a hair test, what technology is the best and most reliable? What are some of the common myths and misunderstandings about testing? And what are the nuances of drug testing for marijuana, and how do I do that best to ensure a safe and productive workplace? Today, we're here to discuss these questions and answer as many of those questions as we can. And as I mentioned before, there will be a question and answer period at the end. I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Suhash Harwani, who is the Senior Director of Science at Quest Diagnostics, and he'll begin our presentation this morning and talk about urine testing for drugs of abuse, workplace drug testing. Dr. Harwani.
All right, Bill, thank you for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today to speak briefly regarding the work we perform here within Employer Solutions at Quest Diagnostics. So just to give a brief background about our Employer Solutions laboratories, we have 2 SAMHSA certified and CAP FTT accredited laboratories across the United States, one located in Kansas and one located in the Pennsylvania area. We have a collection network of around 10,000 collection sites, and we're one of the only laboratories that performs in-house urine, oral fluid, and hair drug testing. So performs all 3 without doing any send-out tests. And we process over 10 million specimens a year, which a lot of that you see reported yearly in the drug testing index for positivity rates, which we'll be talking about today. So for workforce drug testing, urine drug testing the matrix has been the most prevalent matrix for drug testing for workforce, at least. It is the foundation of the industry. I mean, obviously some of that is moving towards oral fluid and hair, but obviously it's the foundational element that has brought us together. So indirectly, because of that, it is the highest volume of testing, and it still currently holds that standard today with the highest volume. Generally, urine is able to detect recent use, previous 24 to 72 hours. Obviously, that time frame that we mentioned is dependent on usage patterns and the potency of dose and how many doses, the frequency of those doses. So there's obviously a play on those time points for that 1 to 3 day time point. I think it's important to understand how testing is performed in the laboratory to understand what we truly do. And this would hold true for oral fluid and hair as well. But obviously specifically to urine today. So the specimens are received in the laboratory. The specimens are ensured that chain of custody, the tamper evidence seals are intact. Once they're accessioned, they are passed to an initial aliquotter where they're aliquoted for initial testing, and that initial testing is performed either by immunoassay or by a mass spectrometry-based screening, which are standards of the industry. Generally, our immunoassays are FDA cleared and paired with the specific testing matrix. If it's urine, would be an FDA cleared immunoassay drug screen, or for that matter, oral fluid would follow a similar pike. From there, negative test results are certified and released same day, usually, and then positive test results would be pulled for confirmatory testing, and that confirmatory testing is done on one of three platforms, either GCMS, a GCMS-MS, or an LC-MS-MS. And GCMS and GCMS-MS have been the gold standard of the industry. They were the foundation, similar to how urine is that foundation. And a lot of that is transitioning or has transitioned to LC-MS technology for numerous reasons. Some of that is specificity and sensitivity of the assays requiring less specimen volume for urine, specifically not requiring as much. But it also inherently allows easier delivery of the specimens to the instrumentation, since we don't need to modify the drug targets to be able to test and quantify them in the specimens. And the last thing is our drug testing index. Yearly, I mentioned we do 10 million plus specimens annually, and we report on that yearly report drug positivity to help understand and to provide that information to the industry and help guide workforce policies with employers. So I'd like to begin with positivities that we saw, and this is a look back at 2020, what we reported from 2021, we reported in 2022. You see, so I'll take a step back and talk about some of the populations that we studied here. So we obviously look at the federally mandated safety sensitive group workforce, and those are the positions that require, under federal oversight, required testing. They could be truck drivers, pilots, in safety sensitive areas. And then there's the general U.S. workforce that we also report on, which is usually the predominant portion of that is pre-employment drug testing. So generally gives you a great marker for trends across the United States and so based on societal changes. And we see a lot of that, and we'll talk about some of that with the marijuana stuff that we are seeing trends. So, I mean, when we look at 2021, and so specifically that dark green bar, we ended the year at 4.6% for 2021. And that 4.6% was the highest in 2 decades. That we hadn't seen a 4.6% positivity rate in the overall U.S. workforce since 2001. But I think there's more to that story once you break it down and look at the federally mandated safety sensitive versus the general U.S. workforce. In the safety sensitive, where you see in the smaller bars in blue, when you look at just 2017 to 2021, you see a slight downtrend. You see an uptick in 2017 to 2018, but relatively mostly a downtrend going there with a slight uptick in 2021. And that uptick and the uptick that you see in the general workforce is mainly due to marijuana. There's some amphetamines in the background as well, but a lot of that driver was the societal changes to marijuana and how recreational marijuana is changing, and societal attitudes are changing towards marijuana. So that's obviously important to note that where the positivity has gone up, and we are seeing relatively high percentages compared to 2 decades ago. And then when we drill down a little bit, specifically just looking at marijuana positivity, you see that general U.S. workforce, where you see that trend up over the last 5 years, and for specifically ending 2021 at 3.9%. But you see that uptick when you look at 2017 all the way to 2021, a consistent uptick year over year. And that uptick, obviously, a lot of that societally changing, laws changing for recreational marijuana, the number of states legalizing recreational marijuana, you see that somewhat direct correlation right here. Whereas in the safety sensitive positions, those blue bars, you don't see that as much. You see a slight uptick that from 2020 to 2021, which is also marijuana related, from marijuana positivity increasing, but you don't see that as much. And that goes to the idea that the safety sensitive positions know that they're going to have random testing. There's going to be testing, somewhat more of a rigorous testing program behind there. So I think this highlights the difference in testing, knowing when you're going to be tested, and positivity maybe not increasing as drastically or year over year as much. And then I think I'd be remiss. We're talking about urine, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring the other two matrices into a discussion about, especially for marijuana positivity. So we talked about what you see in that dark green for urine, specifically on the previous slide, but oral fluid and hair positivity rates for marijuana and other drugs as well. I mean, tend to be higher. You do see higher positivity rates, which really goes to having the right drug testing policy for an employer is important. Having those key facets of urine, oral fluid, and/or hair, depending on what that right mix of those matrices are for a drug testing program, is important to highlight. So just seeing this obviously can mean a lot. From if you are trying to target positivity and you want to see positivity, what do you need to look at other matrices as well? So I think overall I'd like to close with, we've seen some of the highest workforce levels since 2001 for positivity, drug testing positivity, marijuana being the largest component of that increase, overall increase. And one thing I didn't talk about on the marijuana, when we were talking about marijuana positivity, was the continued decrease in ordering of marijuana testing. As recreational marijuana is legalized in different states, obviously laws within the states are changing, and it's causing employers to rethink how they perform marijuana testing based on the state laws that are impacting them. And that we see declines in testing, but obviously ensuring that safety in the workforce and how to deal with that. And I mean, some of the topics today, oral fluid and breath testing, obviously are probably keys to that in the future. But I like the overall, I think, takeaway here is a properly designed drug testing policy can help create a healthier and safer working environment. And that is key to the underlying effort of us reporting the drug testing index and trying to strive to provide that to the industry. So I'd like to close here some resources from the DTI, from drug testing savings calculator that we have, and that will be in the slide deck that will be shared. And then if you would like to get in contact with me, here's my contact information at Quest. And then I'll turn it over to Mark and Mike at Omega.
Thank you, Dr. Harwani. Great start. Just a real quick introduction to Omega Laboratories. We just heard some great information about urine testing and why that has been kind of the mainstay of the drug testing industry. Over 20 years ago, when Omega got started, we were founded with the idea of offering newer options to our clients, such as the oral fluid and the hair testing. As a result of that, we have the largest facility, the largest laboratory in the world of our type that's dedicated just to the advanced specimens. We're working with safety-sensitive clients globally. Both hair and oral fluid have some advantages that make them a great fit for overseas testing. And we now have a dedicated laboratory facility up in Canada as well to help satisfy the needs in that country. So truly a global player, global organization. We have some great tech tools and other support items backing up our operations. My colleague, Mike Jeffries here, I'll flip over to an intro on Mike. He has decades of industry experience. He was a very early advocate of oral fluid testing, and as such, he did help implement one of the largest new oral fluid programs in the United States back in the day. So definitely a great guy to speak a little on the oral fluid. So I'll turn it over to Mike now.
All right, thank you, Mark, and I want to say thank you to everybody in attendance. Also, thank you to ScreenSafe for having me today. As Mark mentioned, Mike Jeffries, VP of Business Development here at Omega Laboratories. I've been with Omega just under 2 years, but I've been in the industry, the drug and alcohol screening industry, for 33 years. So, as you can imagine, I have seen quite a few changes over the years, which I'll go into. Specifically today, I'm going to be talking about the evolution and innovation of oral fluid testing. Oral fluid testing was first commercially launched for workplace back in 1999 by a company called Lab One in conjunction with OraSure Technologies and their Intercept device. I was fortunate enough at the time to be part of that launch as a salesperson at Lab One. As you can imagine, out of the gate, there were a lot of questions and education that were going on. Employers needed to understand how reliable and accurate is oral fluid testing, especially as it correlates to the gold standard urine. We really focused on a couple of things out of the gate, talking about the innovative collection process and procedure as it relates to oral fluid being an on-site option for collection and a self-collection. We'll talk about that versus sending somebody out to a third-party site. And then also the fact that, as Dr. Harwani mentioned, we're still leveraging the same proven technology and quality standards that you have with urine testing. FDA cleared immunoassay techniques for screening, GCMS and LCMS-MS standards and for confirmatory testing. So as we were educating, and there was some slow adoption, really a couple of things took oral fluid to the next level back in the day, and that was two real key early adopters, both Fortune 500 companies. I won't mention their names as I don't have permission to do so, but one being a large national unionized manufacturer, the other being a national big box retailer, both with different reasons and interest in oral fluid testing initially. With the manufacturer specifically, as they negotiated with their labor unions, they were very key and focused on mitigating risk in the workplace, creating a safer work environment for their employees, and of course the union members were all about that as well. So they were really, really interested in the fact that, you have more recent detection capabilities with oral fluid. And they recognized quickly that this would be a better test for reasonable cause post-accident as well. So that was one of the key drivers in their early adoption. As far as the big box retailer is concerned, as you know, retail, you have very high turnover as you're competing for good quality candidates, in a tight labor market especially. You can have somebody right down the road doing the same, and it's really, you're competing for that talent. So their whole focus was trying to compress the time to hire or time to fill. So, part of their process when they would try to, place an offer would be to send somebody out to a third-party site. And of course, if that was an inconvenience to the donor, whether it be, too far away or they didn't have transportation, of course, you could lose a day or two in just getting the sample collected. And they quickly realized that, hey, all of a sudden we have an on-site option now where as soon as we're ready to extend an offer, we can go ahead and collect the specimen right away. But before they pulled the trigger in implementing oral fluid, this retailer actually did a 6-month study. This is back 20 years ago on the same population donors. They decided to do a urine and an oral fluid side by side to look at the positivity correlation. What they found was very interesting. Over 40,000 tests in 6 months, they had a slightly higher hit rate in oral fluid versus urine, and even a slightly higher hit rate in marijuana specifically, over urine. And that was back in the day when every employer was concerned about marijuana and testing for marijuana. So it gave them the reassurance that oral fluid testing was valid. So again, that correlation urine testing was key. We employ very sensitive cutoffs, in picograms or thousands of the nanogram to accommodate lower concentration of drug in oral fluid. Because it is a much smaller specimen. And that positivity, correlates very well to standard urine positivity, which, is measured in nanograms per mil. So what are some of the key benefits of oral fluid testing? The ease of use, obviously, you can collect it anywhere, anytime, generally in 10 to 15 minutes. It was always sort of designed to be a self-administered collection by the donor, under direct observation of a facilitator, whether it be a recruiter, an HR manager, a DER. But what's important here is that the donor is the only one to ever actually, touch the specimen from the point of collection. They place it into the vial, they seal it, And then that goes into a FedEx bag and that's sealed and off you go to the lab. And again, that takes what they perceive to be bias out of the process, right? It can obviously be collected at the workplace or in a post-pandemic environment as we have today, where you have a large number of employees and candidates working from home. It can even be virtually proctored via video. We have a couple of different national partners that actually offer this service today, where via video recorded session, somebody can walk them through the process and again ensure that there is specimen integrity. As it relates to urine specifically, I think one of the reasons early on you saw that there was a strong correlation there was, with oral fluid, there's an inability to adulterate or substitute the specimen because it is observed. In addition, there's a high number of urines that will also show dilute. If there's, and of course that comes with drinking a lot of water. If you have a shy bladder, can't void. So I think when you take those things out of the equation, you do see that correlation very strongly to oral fluid positivity. And then of course, once it is sealed in the buffer, it's very highly stable in transit. So as long as it's kept at room temperature, you can test it for up to 21 days post collection. I mentioned the recent detection capabilities. What we're actually collecting here is a plasma byproduct. So essentially, as the drug is metabolized through the bloodstream, it enters the oral cavity in the form of a viscous fluid. The pad is designed to sit next to the cheek for about 5 minutes, and it collects this plasma byproduct, this viscous fluid, as it enters the oral cavity. And that's what's then placed in the buffer and tested at the laboratory. So there's generally a higher concentration of drug in that plasma byproduct, more so than what we call neat saliva or spit. And that offers a standard detection window of about 4 to 6 hours post-ingestion, up to about 24 to 40 hours on average. So again, that more recent snapshot of what somebody may have just ingested, whether it be on the way to work, whether it be at work. So a lot of employers find that very, very attractive. And finally, the value of oral fluid testing. When I mentioned the elimination of third-party collections, that's not only from a convenience perspective, but also an expense perspective. If you think about your clinics out there today, there's a very broad range of prices or fees associated with third-party collections, 10 to 15. In rural areas, you're talking $25 up to $40. So it's very difficult to gauge exactly what you could be testing or spending on an annual basis at times. Oral fluid, exactly what you're going to pay each and every test. So it allows for a lot more consistent budgeting within an employer testing program. Saving time in the hiring process, again, it affords the ability to immediately upon the desire to place an offer to go ahead and collect the specimen and, and get it off to the laboratory. Once it hits the laboratory, it's the same exact turnaround time as you have with urine. If it screens negative, you're going to have a result by end of next day, 2 to 3 days, and it has to get a confirmation as a positive or a negative. And then with panel options today, we offer 6 or 10 drugs, up to 10 drugs, and that's with or without THC, as many employers are removing THC from the menu, but we still do offer it. And of course, there's other drug classes that are coming down the pipe with our partner manufacturers. Obviously fentanyl is a big one that we're closely looking at, and we're hoping to expand our portfolio of test items here as we move forward. So more to come there. And then finally, I want to just highlight the fact, of course, that HHS, which is the Department of Health and Human Services, has approved guidelines for oral fluid testing for federal programs, including DOT. So at this point, there's a lot of work to be done by the manufacturers around the cutoff levels and the labs to prepare for DOT oral fluid testing. But it is coming, and I guess I would say stay tuned for when that might be commercially available. So thanks again for your time. Here's my contact information. I'll be looking forward to answering any questions I can for you at the end of the session, and I'll hand it off back over to my colleague, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Great job talking about oral fluid. I'm going to talk a little bit about the hair testing that we do and how that fits in. I've been at Omega for decades now, mainly focused on the hair side, working with safety sensitive employers, trying to help reduce the cost, accident, risks associated with the drug users. So always with drug testing, you're kind of trying to answer a question, and it just depends what that question is. And that question has changed a lot more for many employers in the last couple of years, with the changes around marijuana. Because of that, there probably has never really been one best method for drug testing. And that really shows the importance of using a group like ScreenSafe that can help coordinate multiple different testing methods. You may want to use hair for a long-term look back on some safety sensitive employees. You may want to use oral fluid or a shorter term method, for more recent usage when hiring. So you really need a program manager or provider that can kind of help consolidate all the data that we're throwing at you here and figure out what's best for your specific program. Hair goes back the furthest. An inch and a half of head hair can go back 3 months. Even shorter hair, you're still getting a month or two. So we're really looking at what we call like a lifestyle test. We're just trying to show what decisions somebody has made over a very long-term period of time. We're looking at this as like a deterrent. That's the main thing when hiring. We're trying to show the past history, what choices they're making, if they're not safe, if it doesn't fit with the background screen or driver record check, other services, then that can help in your hiring decision there. So some of the other advantages of hair testing are the same as oral fluid. There's always that observed collection. You can't cheat. You don't need special facilities or same gender collectors. So a lot of these kind of roll up to maybe give a little bit more dignity to that candidate, when you're bringing somebody on to hire them, that it's a little bit easier of a test. Also, as Mike mentioned, they're both very stable for shipping internationally. So that's why you see we get samples on a daily basis from Pacific Rim, Middle East, other countries, both hair and oral fluid can come in that way. Don't need refrigerated or temperature requirements or whatnot. Along with the panels, we're doing a government, like a DOT lookalike panel, all the way up to a 17 panel in hair that has fentanyl. We can do other trending drugs like methadone, tramadol, whatnot. And we can also drop marijuana. So with the oral fluid, more so maybe than the hair, but we're seeing just such a wide variety of programs where some employers want to test for marijuana when they hire, and then maybe not post-accident. So you're even seeing clients start to break down the type of testing that they're doing or the panel that they're running, by test type. So, once again, to have a group like ScreenSafe, to help advise on that and coordinate everything with the labs is probably a good thing. I think it's great that both Dr. Harwani and Mike talked about the same kind of thing here about the proven scientific method and how we're testing. We get that question a lot since, there is a DOT process for urine, a SAMHSA urine test, and that is the gold standard. How do the oral fluid and hair compare? Both of these we're doing a screen, and then if there's something inconclusive in that screen, we do the confirmation as needed. You have a sample that's positive via 2 different methods, that takes out so many of the candidate excuses or things that they'll come to you with. And that's what's considered a forensically valid test. We have those 2 different results, 2 different methods that match up and are kind of consolidating there. So we can say, yes, this is positive. And then it is going to stand up in court. The big thing with that, obviously, with us and with Quest and working with top tier labs, so we're always looking at that legal defensibility of the testing. So our employers, the clients, nobody has issues there. With hair, we get asked sometime about, hey, how are you looking at actual ingestion versus exposure? The hair testing industry, hair testing's been around for decades, similar as Mike was talking about with oral fluid. So you have all these standards in terms of what cutoff level we're using. Sometimes we don't find just the parent drug, we'll find a metabolite. And then there's some wash procedures if needed before confirmation. So, rest assured with hair testing, through the workplace labs, you're getting that clear result that is going to show, some usage or some history there. Along those lines, since we're both waiting, for, federal government approval of hair and oral fluid, in the meantime, there are multiple other credentials and proficiency testing programs available. ISO 17025 is a great program that's specific to hair and oral fluid. Dr. Harwani had mentioned being a CAP lab for forensic drug testing. We have that as well. And then all of the labs are doing proficiency testing on these specimens, which is where we get blinds in, we're running them through. They'll have a known level or known result that they're looking for, and we're all using that to help triangulate, show that the methods are working and that the process was validated properly. With federal acceptance, it's just like anything else, everything the federal government doing is taking so long, it's taking much longer than the industry or safety professionals would like. hair and oral fluid have both been in process for a long time, and we're expecting some updates to come out this summer even. That there's this drug test advisory board that meets, and I think they're having an announcement here maybe in May even on some new things. So we're hoping that that's all moving forward and allowing industry to kind of get new tools out there, to the employers. For anybody that does not have federally regulated truck drivers, pilots, whatnot, you can switch to hair and oral fluid right now. You can also add hair or another drug testing method under company authority. So we've seen that when you talk about who's using drug testing, we have probably 25, 40 motor carriers that are doing hair in addition to that federal urine. So we have some good paired data there. And we also have military and police, safety forces worldwide. We do a great deal of work down in Texas, Louisiana with oil and gas companies, production out in the field, high risk manufacturing, food processing. My colleagues have talked about unions a little bit. Even unions, they're sometimes looking at hair as like kind of that gatekeeping type of test, before somebody gets in the union, just to look at the choices, make sure they're a good fit. Obviously, once somebody's in the union, if there's an issue, you may want to help them later. You could do hair to check levels, or through a substance abuse program, some of the other services that are offered out there. Case study data that we have here, this is paired data from a motor carrier, a whole year of their pre-employment testing. And it just shows really the efficiency of hair testing. We're going to catch many more hard drug users positive. When you look at that data, you can really see that's the strong spot for hair testing. We did catch more marijuana users positive. Urine caught some that may have not overlapped. That's probably the biggest gap between hair and urine testing. Is hair, we're looking for a higher level of marijuana, so it might not be the best test method if you really do want to catch marijuana. And that's once again why we're often talking about hair as like a paired specimen type. Where you may want to, for pre-employment, do a urine test if you care about the short term, or look into even the breath testing that Nina's going to talk about as a real immediate type of before that, employment point or before that shift change or whatever. So, that's why we have that data that's out there. This is a specific employer, but it does kind of overall match what Dr. Harwani was showing with that Quest drug test index, which is a great tool. The urine testing, the percentage in that drug test index was under 1% for hard drugs. Hair, obviously, we're finding much more. However, on the flip side, when you looked at that gap, oral fluid specifically was really pulling ahead of hair and maybe even urine in terms of how many more marijuana users you're catching in recent years as marijuana usage has spiked. So if that is a concern, that might be something to look into there as well. That is the quick overview of hair testing. If you have any technical questions on hair on Omega, here's my contact information as well. You're always free to reach out. Look forward to hearing from people. And now I'm going to turn it over to Nina French, who's also been in the industry a great deal of time and is an innovator, working on the breath testing. So very excited to hear what she has to say.
Thanks, Mark. Well, I'm going to start. So I love that the three that went before me, we've all been around for a good long time. And I want to reiterate a couple of things. There is some, I think, Mark, your slide said it right. There is no right drug testing method for anything. I've been in the industry for over 30 years. And really, we set out to look at, as these new drug testing laws are being passed specifically for cannabis, as an industry, how do we give additional tools for this new reality? So I'm not going to spend a lot of time about Hound Labs. We were founded in 2014 and have been working on the solution that was launching this year, which is a breath cannabis test, for the past 10 years. And we've learned a lot of lessons, and it's taken a long time. What I will say is the reason we have our bio slides for your information is we did get the benefit at Hound Labs of building on all of these years of information, lessons learned, and improvements in our marketplace. And so we built this as a solution for THC testing, as well as an easy way to sort of plug into the existing ecosystem that each of you really employs when you're designing and implementing your workplace drug testing program. So we did get the benefit of that, and we're going to talk a little bit about what the benefits of that are. But as all of you know, the challenge is workplace drug testing. As of this week, Delaware just passed. So they're the 22nd state to have recreational marijuana passed. And really, as all of these laws passed, they never sat down with our industry and said, hey, are you ready for this? The challenge is when you're looking at the laws that are being tested and the policies that most employers have, we really are being stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? I bring everybody back to what the original intent of drug testing is, and it really is to deter use before it happens at your workplace. And so I think many people get sort of in this static way of looking at drug testing that we're out to catch people. We're not out to catch people. We're actually out to deter use. And Dr. Harwani in his slides showed through the DTI data that this is a very effective risk mitigation tool for employers. And the employment of each of these drug testing methodologies that we presented today are really a key part of that solution and that risk mitigation strategy. But THC is now proving to be different in its challenge because it is legal. And so what Hound Labs Cannabis Breathalyzer does is it targets those THC molecules. This is one of the questions we all get asked on the regular when we present drug testing. Does CBD, does CBN come up in your test? And the answer is no. We are looking for THC, which is that thing that is making the person high, frankly, right? So I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, so I'll just say it like it is, right? THC is what gets you high. It's the psychoactive ingredient, and that's what we're looking for. The Hound Labs breathalyzer collects a sample, and we're going to go into it in a little bit more detail, but it collects a breath sample and it collects an air sample at the same time. So it's a two-part system, and it is a smart base station as well as a cartridge or a series of cartridges. When you get the collection done, you snap the cartridge down and you preserve that sample. That sample is then scanned and it's sent, and we track all of that through our database, which we call the Hound Labs Retriever. It's a paperless tracking system and a results portal that you can take advantage of. And then that sample is shipped, packaged up and shipped to the laboratory for testing. So it's a lab-based system. The Retriever database can be integrated with your system, or it can be a standalone system. In most cases, like with ScreenSafe, you're going to have a portal that you get your results through and that you can order through. And we can integrate with that portal to allow you to have the 24/7 access. We know where each of our units are deployed through GPS tracking. So we know where that collection took place. And you can integrate with us or with your lab partner. So there's a lot of different ways to get access to the results. And I believe that our system will always be integrated with other testing because we simply do not test for those wide panels of drugs that these other methodologies test for. We test strictly for THC. The process has been built, again, we got the benefit of knowing what we've seen in this industry over the past 40 years. So we have each cartridge ID that has unique barcode and that is scanned when it is and stored in our system. The breath sample is collected. We collect the same amount of sample each time, and the base station tells the collector, whether that be you as an employer or a collector, if you're going to a collection site, it tells them when the sample's starting, and it allows the donor to take breaths, but not delay for too long to get that same amount of sample each time. And then it notifies you both audibly and visually when you've collected enough sample. And again, then we capture all of that data, including the signatures in the chain of custody at the collection site. It's then shipped to the laboratory, and you can confirm, just like you guys are used to with any other test, right? We can see where it is in its journey to the laboratory. Once it's received at the laboratory, the lab captures the digital image of the sample and the barcodes. And again, that's captured and supplied to you. And then they do a test that is just very similar to what Dr. Harwani talked about, right? So there is a screening test of each sample. If the screening test is positive or at or above the level, then it goes to a confirmatory test. We use LCMS. And then once that is confirmed, it's reported to you through Retriever or through your integration. And again, those two steps are very important to the process. I want to just sort of direct everybody's attention to the fact that we do not know, despite the fact that we're seeing a lot of laws passed that talk about impairment. Workplace drug testing isn't about impairment. Never has been. That is not what we are trying to do. We're trying to deter use before it happens and detect use if it did happen. We are likely not to settle on a per se legal limit for some time in the US. And a per se legal limit is what you're used to with alcohol. But if you think about it, right, the legal limit in most states is 0.08. In Utah, it's 0.05. But when you apply alcohol to workplace, we often remove people at a 0.04. And so what we're doing is promoting safety. We're looking to support productivity, and we're looking to deter all of those things that we know drugs in the workplace cause that are costly to employers, right? That open you up to litigation. And so what we did is really look at what are we trying then to affect in the world of legalized marijuana? And what we're trying to affect is the way that we can use an additional drug testing methodology in this established ecosystem to provide insight into recent use. And when we say recent use, we mean very recent use. Now, we don't align it with impairment because we don't know what impairment is, but we do know that in your breath, THC only lasts for a few hours. A few hours, if you look at what NHTSA studies, NHTSA says peak impairment lasts 3 hours. We're going to see millions and millions of data points over the next decade where people try and determine what is the right impairment level. But what we can show you, either as a standalone or in conjunction with your other drug tests, right? So oral fluid or urine or hair testing, we can show you through this system if the use that you are detecting is recent. So the ecosystem is exactly this. It's an automated system that detects in parts per trillion that allows you to really walk through the collection process of both that donor sample and that air sample. The Hound result database lets you have an online portal to order and that paperless management that you can transfer and track your test results. The smart base station connects the employers, the labs, the collection sites. We can do automated software updates as we make any changes to those, to that base station. And it's a touch screen similar to like an iPad that allows you to enter information right there. And we are integrated with Quest Diagnostics so that the results that Quest processes come right back through either your connectivity through Quest or through your direct connectivity with your TPA like ScreenSafe or through Retriever database. The training is pretty easy actually, because that base station is so smart. The base station allows very little room for error in the collection, but we do have online training that supports both the employers and the collection sites as you're going through and learning this, because it's new, right? New methodology. It supports the policy goals. I think all of us as sort of industry veterans know how important it is to always talk about policy. And as Mark and Mike and Suhash mentioned, right? There's no one size fits all. So when we're looking at your goal for your policy, looking at that recent detection window allows you to do continuous monitoring. It allows you to do pre-access testing that says, when you show up, if you chose to use outside of the workplace in a legal state, we're not going to look at that, but we are going to look at what you're doing right before or during work that could affect your performance in the workplace. We also support that It doesn't need to be a zero tolerance policy. You should look at your policy and consider return to duty or stand down as you look at this data, right? So if you tested positive with a breathalyzer, then you are removed from work during that period. But then, go back to those EAP and SAP programs. They're really important to relook at your policies at this point and consider how could you apply this new method with your existing methods to have that additional piece of data. What we often find is, someone mentioned unions, right? What we often find is you could use a hair test to look at the lifestyle. But what employers like about breath testing is you can then look at, if you have a positive hair test, or if you have a positive urine test, or if you have a positive oral fluid test, and you have a negative breath test, that tells you that the injury or accident may have picked up past use. And that gives you a whole different data set than has been available to you when determining how are you going to then reinforce your policy goals in that state or as a company-wide policy. And I think this really just sits to what are the benefits, right? So it shifts the focus from past use to recent use. You can look at the positive results and say, if it's positive, say with an oral fluid test, and it's positive with breath, then you understand that that use was very contemporaneous. It was proximate use to the workday. That allows you to take a different employment action and to protect your company in a very different way than not having that important piece of data and not being able to isolate recent use. What we find is, if you are in a highly competitive hiring environment, it also can allow you to say that as long as we know that use was not recent, so our negative is super important, because if you're positive on a different methodology, but you're negative on the breath test that accompanies it for THC, then you can enforce the policies that says as long as that use isn't right before or during work, then we can still hire you or retain you as an employee. We find that employers, that really resonates in this really competitive work environment or hiring environment. That's the end. That's a wrap for us. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Bill. And I think we have a pretty decent set of questions to go through. This is our contact information for Hound if you'd like to get in touch with us after the webinar as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Nina. And I think you said something that always resonates with me, and that's that, what's your goal for your program? What is the goal of your program? And your policy should reflect your goal. And if your goal, whatever that is. So one of the first questions we got had to do with, the question was, please confirm that the 24 to 72 hour detection of recent use does not necessarily apply to marijuana. And that question came in during Dr. Harwani's presentation. So I'm not entirely sure what the question means, and it was from an anonymous source. So Dr. Harwani, do you want to address that?
Yeah, generally the 24 to 72, I mean, when we look at that one-time use, when we look at those scenarios, there's always going to be the nuance where you can get into the habitual use, where you can get fatty storage of something sticky like THC there for detection. Obviously, that could vary depending on what laboratory cutoffs are being used.
Oh, we just lost your sound, Dr. Harwani. We just lost sound. Can you hear me? I can't hear me.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, wondering if you could. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we got you back.
Okay, we got you back, Dr. We lost you, Dr. Harwani, at the end there at the tail.
Okay, I apologize, but yeah, I can reiterate it if I got cut off. But yeah, generally 24 to 72 is what we use for urine testing, irregardless. But obviously, you have to take into habitual use scenarios. Obviously, all of those add nuances. Fatty, there's reports out there and publications out there on fatty storage of THC as well, and slow release of it. I mean, so there's a lot of nuance factors, but the general metabolism guidelines say to stick with the 24 to 72 hour guidelines.
So let me ask you a question based on my experience as an EAP counselor and an addictions counselor. And so oftentimes, and I see a couple of EAP people I know on the webinar today, we'll get someone will be referred to us because of a positive drug test. And they will say to us, hey, I only used once. I used last weekend or 2 weeks ago at a class reunion. I saw a bunch of people I haven't seen since high school, and that's the only reason I tested positive. Now, I have a standard response to that question, but I would be curious to hear and this would be on a urine test primarily. So it's any standard or any kind of response to that from Dr. Harwani or Mike or Mark?
I mean, generally our stance is, I was like, every specimen's unique. It stands on its own. A positive indicates use, and the positive specimen, I mean, it stands. So, I mean, from a use standpoint, I mean, that's generally the guidelines we would provide for something like that.
I get the opposite question to that all the time here with hair testing. We do legal testimony in military tribunals and union arbitrations and whatnot. Somebody will have a positive urine or oral fluid and they'll want to do a hair. And I'll caution them, hey, if you do a hair test, you can show that you're not a heavy user, maybe not a repeat user. If your employer is willing to consider that, but we can't necessarily say you're not a one-time user. Somebody could have had the bad luck to, do a little bit of drug one time, get popped for a random the next day on an oral fluid or urine, and be positive on that. So, once again, that kind of goes back to what question are you asking? And then it was interesting hearing Nina talk about how maybe, breath is even that much shorter time frame, kind of is going to come into play with all this as well. So I know that the counselors are going to have their hands full juggling all this, I guess.
Well, my response always when someone said I smoked once 2 weeks ago, and that's why I came up positive on my urine drug test, I'd say, boy, that was some really good stuff, because it's pretty generally unlikely. But all right, we've gotten this question a couple of times, and the question is about is any type of use for THC shown in breath? So ingestion, if I eat it, if I smoke it, or if I vape it.
Yeah, so the data that we have published right now from Hound Labs is based on our vaping, smoking, right? So that's the focus. We are in the process of testing with edibles, but any way you ingest it is going to come out. I think it's really important to reinforce that none of us say in any of our testing methodologies, like, we always have a window. And I think it goes back to the first question. So we test for THC, that's the psychoactive, component of cannabis. If each one of us today were to either smoke a joint, vape, or take an edible, each one of us would test positive and negative at a different time, either because we are a frequent user or an infrequent user, or we held the smoke in our lungs longer, or we inhaled deeper. And so that's why I think it's really important now to reinforce that this is a policy, it's an objective measure. Each of these drug testing methodologies is an objective measure that reinforces your company policy and gives you an information that can be applied objectively across your organization. And so there will be people who on a urine test longer for whatever reason. It doesn't mean you as a company are doing something right or wrong. It's that you're applying this tool uniformly, and just like anything else, drugs are going to act a little bit differently in each person's body. But as long as you have an objective measure that's non-discriminatory and valid in the way, the means we test it, and the forensic defensibility, then it should be something that you can apply in your workplace. So that was a little bit of I went on a tangent there, but.
Okay. Mike and Mark, you mentioned the DOT, that HHS had approved hair and saliva for DOT testing. Do you have a sense of when the regs would come down for that?
Yeah, they haven't approved any guidelines for hair yet. That's still going on. The conversations are going on, but as far as oral fluid testing, they have issued guidelines for oral fluid testing. You can find that in the Federal Register, so it's public information. So it comes down to establish the cutoffs are a bit different. It's also calling for a neat saliva versus a padded collection device. 1 ml of neat saliva, and so there's going to be some flexing that has to take place and some development that needs to take place with reagent manufacturers, with laboratories, developing and tweaking their instrumentation, things of that nature, before it could come to the market. And so, and I'll defer to Dr. Hawani. You might have something more to add here from a laboratory technical perspective. But right now, it's just a kind of a wait and see as to when that might all come together.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all in the wait and see for the DOT side of it. I mean, you can prepare as much as you want based on what HHS has out there, but you used to really want to wait for what DOT is going to come out with in the final. So we're all wait and see at this point.
We got a question from Tom where he wanted to know, in states where THC is legal, where where THC is legal, what percentage of employers have dropped marijuana from their testing program? Do you have a general sense of that? Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I can start that discussion. I mean, I don't think I can give an exact percentage. I think it really depends on a case-by-case employer basis, based on how much testing may be in a specific state. If it's California, if it's Washington, I mean, if there's specific legislation that's coming out that may impact them directly, and the risk adversity of the drug testing policy and what the risk they're willing to take. I don't think I could give a direct number to quantify it specifically though.
And it could also be based on, sorry about that. I was just going to add, it could be based on reason for test. I mean, coming out of the pandemic, I think a lot of states are very sensitive to, folks being able to get back into the workplace, find jobs. So they might eliminate it for pre-employment, but they still want to maintain it for other reasons, reasonable cause, post-accident scenarios, those types of things.
Okay. Anyone else?
Well, and there is no state that has outright banned the testing of THC. It's important that employers get really active in tracking how these laws are being passed. Some states do have some more restrictive laws. Some states now have safety sensitive carve-outs or the reason for tests. Some states, unfortunately, are including the must prove impairment, which again is going to be very restrictive from employers, and we hope that we won't see those continue to pass. But again, I think we as a panel advocate that you maintain testing. You just figure out how to best use the test for THC in those states. Otherwise, unless you're tracking actively against your workers' comp statistics, your absenteeism, your accidents at the same time, once you drop it, you're going to have a really hard time determining what the long-term impact of dropping that is, right, to the cost in the workplace.
Yeah, I'm curious. When I've been doing this since 1998, I think. No, before that, 1989. And so one of the things I remember is that the driver for a lot of drug testing was workers' comp. And I am curious to see how that changes over the next couple of years as drug testing changes with marijuana. I do have a question here from someone. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Bill, I did want to add one thing in there. I mean, the drug testing index from 2021, we do report on the decline in the ordering of marijuana. So we do have a decline there, but that's really correlated more towards recreational versus medical. I mean, you can gain some percentage if you want to quantify it that way. I just think it's a little more nuanced to answer the question as is. But I mean, if you look at that specifically, you could probably quantify it right around 10% based on that. Just looking at that data itself, if you look at just the trend line towards it. But overall, I mean, it's a little more nuanced when you look at state by state legalization of recreational law.
So it depends on whether it was medical or recreational.
Yeah, I mean, the state laws and where the testing is being performed by the employer. Yeah.
Okay. Is there any academic research that shows that breath testing can detect cannabis edibles?
There is Is there any? I don't know. We will publish our studies and the independent studies as they become available and the data becomes available on edibles. So you can look for them from independent studies from the Hound Labs data. But to our knowledge, there is none at the moment that is published by any source other.
Okay. Is one of the things I wondered about personally was just for hair testing. Have you seen the use of hair testing for people who have been in treatment? So I come out of treatment and my employer, or, maybe I'm a doctor, maybe I'm a nurse, maybe I'm a tradesperson, and my employer says, we're going to do follow-up testing on you. And we're going to do hair testing because we don't want to take the chance that you're using and we just happen to not test you at the right time. We want to make sure that you're not using because the nature of your work is so safety sensitive.
Yeah, we've definitely seen an increase in that with professional health monitoring. I think with those types of programs, obviously, there's always going to be like a weekly component that's going to be a short-term test, such as an oral fluid or a urine in many cases. But we do even have like in healthcare hospitals, we're seeing it more and more in that area. You could have a hospital network where at any point in time, 5 or 10% of their doctors or nurses are in these professional health monitoring programs. They have different access to drugs and whatnot. So they will order a hair test maybe once a year. As mentioned, we have, 10, 13, 17 panel variations, that do get the tramadol and fentanyl and the different drug types in there. So we're probably seeing more like the 10 and 13 panel hair tests for that. So that is something that's available.
And again, from my point of view, it's not about catching someone. It's about when you see a problem, getting that person back to the resources that he or she needs to get back to where they need to be. It's just making sure that the work they do is safe and that if they need more help, we get them the help as quickly as possible.
And that's what's nice about those programs. We do a great deal of work with hair testing for private schools and high schools as well. It's another application. And most of those tests are diversion. It's not like we're going to suspend this person or kick them out of school. It's, to have a talk with counseling and get them back on track and take the next steps. So that's, another thing, as a lab, our role is always to report what we find. And then once again, Bill as a counselor can tell you more than anybody, some of the next step of how you interpret and make a decision. And what you do with that data is a whole other step, right?
Mm-hmm. Are you, I know, Nina, you mentioned that about marijuana, and one of the things that we've seen pop up is people testing positive because, and they thought they were using CBN or CBD or something else, and they tested positive on a drug test. And so my question is, are you seeing people who are completely, we see this a lot where people completely shocked they tested positive, but they have a justifiable reason for being surprised because they thought they were just using a non-THC containing substance. Does that come up a lot? And is there any way to help those folks?
I mean, I think Dr. Harwani, based on the level of THC in CBD products, could probably answer that more effectively. I know that in CBD, there is often an allowable, a very, very small percentage of THC. I would challenge that it would be fairly difficult, in my opinion, to see that at reportable levels in any of the methodologies we have. I would say from an employer perspective, the best policy to have is that you should use no products containing cannabis. That's the only way you can be sure, is no products that contain cannabis.
Which means you have to rely on the label to be an accurate label. And so there was a report in New York Times yesterday about people using melatonin, and the products they're buying have 350 times the level of melatonin that the label says. And I know we've seen several studies from a variety of sources talking about the unreliability of the labeling for marijuana products.
It really is.
I mean, go ahead.
I was just because I think it really is buyer beware with those products. I know I've heard that at the conferences a million times, and everybody's always said that. It's just, if you have a company car, you're subject to post-accident testing, don't use any CBD products. It's buyer beware, it's a risk. Nina had a great comment earlier to point back to, which is just, all these states and the whole industry and everything, they rolled out all these products and, the recreational or medicinal use of marijuana, and they never checked with the industry. How do we test for this or differentiate? They also never tested with how do you validate the consistency of these products or the safety of these products.
Right.
And
Yeah, that's it.
And
I
although the
think it's
cannabis
really-
industry is right, the first legalization happened in '96. It is still in its infancy. They're developing pay products. How do they pay for it? How do they distribute it? How do they regulate it? How do they look at the product consistency of products across states? You can't be sure unless you're sure.
The science can't
Sorry.
keep up with the money. Yeah.
I mean, it is difficult but going back to the specimen, the unique specimen being positive, I mean, I think inherently the policy that the employers enact is ensured to provide safety, right? I mean, there's a safety component, a large safety component here that, I mean, the positive, no matter where it came from, it's still there and it's above the detection limit and the cutoff of the assay. So, I mean, it's not necessarily us to try to figure out from a laboratory standpoint of where it arrived from. I mean, it is really the buyer beware logic. I mean, you have to, and I mean, it informs that donor that in the future, hopefully they're a little more careful if that was truly the source of that positive.
And I think the last question that came up that I want to just raise is what is the cost for breath testing for marijuana? Do you guys, Nina, do you have a sense of what that's going to look like yet? Nina, I think she froze. Well, heck.
It looks frozen.
Nina, can you hear me? Oh, she's gone. All right. Terrible timing. The anticipation was building. Should have asked that question earlier. I don't see any other questions. And so with that, I want to thank all of you. I know that we have seen a lot of issues come up with drug testing. We have in our industry, one of the things we are seeing in our company, one of the things we're seeing is the people we've worked with for many, many years. There you are, Nina. The people we've worked with for many years have been retiring. And so a lot of the questions that people knew the answer to, the folks who had those answers are retiring. And so we're having to reacquaint a lot of people with the issues of drug testing and the efficacy and the cutoff levels and all of those things. So I'm incredibly grateful to all of you. And Nina, the question I was going to ask you right before you froze was just, has Hound determined a price for the breath testing for marijuana yet? Is that something you guys have nailed down?
We do, and it really does depend on volume and who you're getting it through. But if somebody is looking for pricing, we can provide an email or based on the different scenarios. There's some different pricing. It is going to hover on the higher range, obviously, because it's a newer technology. But we can get you that.
Okay, and then we just got a question from the anonymous attendee again. When is the breath test available for purchase? Is it currently available?
You should get on the waiting list right now. As a smaller company, we are going to struggle to fill that wait list we have, and it's coming available in the next several weeks.
All right, and one of the questions I have been asked by a friend who works in the labor union, he said, when a company comes out with breath testing for marijuana, can you let me know if they're publicly traded and what their symbol is?
It's Hound Labs, but we are not publicly traded.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask the participants or the panelists to stick around, and I want to thank all of the attendees, the participants, for showing up today. I'm enormously grateful to Mike and Mark from Omega Labs, Dr. Harwani from Quest Diagnostics, and to Nina French from Hound Labs. And I also want to thank the folks at CAM, the Chicago Association Management Company, who have been the backbone for this presentation today. Thank you, everybody.